Welcome to International Women's Day for the dinner party. This is our 20th year celebrating in honor of International Women's Day, and we are so thrilled to have the amazing Lisa LaFlamme as our keynote this year. Unfortunately, this year it's not a live in-person event, but we're hopeful that next year we'll be able to come back to you and have a wonderful gala again. But this is really a showstopper, and we are so thrilled to be able to have you with us. So thank you, Lisa.
It is truly my pleasure to be here. At least we're in person. I wish we were in front of a live audience always, but this is great, and it's just such an organization I believe so much in that I'm thrilled to be part of it, especially on International Women's Day.
Now, you have been a huge supporter of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, which is one of the core charities that we support. But recently, you've come back from a trip to Africa that is a little bit different. So tell us a little bit about that trip and what did you do there and how had that impacted you?
Well, I have a little bit of jet lag, so I warn you now on that front. But really, it's actually a full circle experience for me because I went to Tunisia and Kenya to focus for Journalists for Human Rights, to focus on women's rights and how amplifying women's rights through the media, you can change, you can force change. And what I've learned, and I guess we all knew it, and especially when we look at Afghanistan, but you can change laws faster than you can change minds. And that has been, it's always harsh and difficult to come up against that, but you know, in Tunisia, for example, for the first time ever in an Arab country, there is now an actual law on the books that is targeted at helping women, victims of domestic violence or sexual, gender-based violence. So there is absolute change happening. The issue is implementing, enforcing those laws. So I've seen a lot over the last few weeks just covering those stories in those countries, but I know that it's in so many countries that we need to amplify the voices of women so that we can change society, really. It's more than laws.
And this organization really, that's at its core, what it's trying to do is change laws so that women's voices can be heard around the world.
Absolutely. I think, you know, you look at the long road. A lot of these countries also experienced no democracy or fragile democracy. Tunisia, for example, is now, let's call it a fragile democracy. And part of that really is equality. And you can't really have a modern society without equality. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about that given the fact that it's International Women's Day. But as I said, it really is hand in glove. You can't do it without men either. Very important to have the support of men to force change for women.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as part of this process and trying to put together, you know, what are some of the amazing questions? There's so many questions we could ask you. We wanted to incorporate some young girls because, you know, you are someone that many people look up to, and as a face on the television, as a face on the internet, on Instagram, YouTube. You know, that's where a lot of the young people look for their news these days. We invited a couple of young girls to ask questions, and I think one of them specifically speaks to your most recent trip. This question is from, bear with me, from Samra, and she is a grade 5 student, and she is learning about you know, women's rights and equalities, and all through a social justice lens. So why don't you just have a listen to this question?
Wonderful. Okay. Hello, Samra.
Hi, Ms. LaFlamme. Thank you for taking my question. Can you tell us barriers you faced as a young female journalist and what you did to overcome those barriers? What advice, if any, do you give to the young journalists you met on your recent trip to Africa?
Great question, Samra. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can say that for me, I started in 1988 in this industry, and so it was a different world. There were very few women reporters, just reporting. There was a lot of pressure on the women in there, but what did I do? Honestly, I never looked at gender for myself. I just tried to work harder. Always still do my research more than anybody else if I could, know absolutely every potential answer to every question I was going to ask before I asked it, so that if I caught someone changing their story, I could catch them on it, I could call them out on it. So for me, it has always been obvious that, you know, there was a different world for men and women. It's changing, thankfully. In Canada, it is absolutely changing, especially for women in journalism. But you asked about what was my advice to the young women in Africa, and that is a sad story, because there is such an endemic problem of sexual discrimination against women in the media in Africa in general, and Kenya has the highest number. I think it's something like 76% of women face sexual discrimination. And I'm talking everything from lewd text messages to physical touching, to rape, to going to your boss and saying, I want to go cover a story, and the boss then suggesting a favor would need to unfold before you would get permission to tell that story. So my advice, they're leaving the media because the pressure is too intense. And my advice to them, and my advice to any young woman or young man, because this gender-based violence can be same-sex as well as men against women, women against men sometimes. And I think the message is, be brave, be strong, don't give up, always don't give up, and tell people. If you see it, say it. Exposing it, naming it is shaming it. And I really do believe it. And I know that might sound naive to some of the women who've experienced terrible things, but it's a start. In countries like Kenya, the Congo, and we'll get to Afghanistan, as I said, but you have to call things out. If things unfold in secret, you are never going to expose it and change it. Thank you again for your question.
So what were some of the more hopeful interactions that you had when you were in Africa and Tunisia? Were there some bright lights where you can see, you know, there's going to be change, or these women, they've got it?
I would say one of the most incredible experiences was going to, I'd heard about this school called the Greenland School. This is a school for teenage mothers, girls as young as 10 years old who become pregnant. So the school has there's 70 girls with their babies. These girls were outcasts in their rural communities or in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. And this one social worker, her name is Purity Gikunda. She thought, no, we can't do this. We can't just, one girl that I interviewed, her name was Serafina. She was top of her class before she was raped and became pregnant at 13. She herself, through social media, heard about this school, reached out directly to Purity Gikunda, and it took many, many months for her to come 1,000 kilometers from her rural home on the border of Kenya and Uganda to this school. And it is the most primitive school. I'm not kidding you. They don't have any international foreign funding. They are, however, getting an education. And in the morning when they wake up, their babies wake up, they feed their babies, they go to class, they come back on a morning break, they feed their babies again, they come back on lunch break, they feed their baby. Like it's a fascinating world to see what this one woman has done to try to give a second chance to these young girls, and really an education, which is the definition of making a difference, is an education changes everything. So this is a high school program They're not outcasts, they're going to be graduates. And honestly, it was incredibly emotional to be with those girls, to hold those babies, to know the history of this young life already, and yet the determination to continue with an education. And I think Purity is a saint, what she's doing. And I mean, there's 600 girls on the waiting list, but with no money right now, there's only 70 girls there with their babies. So it was an extraordinarily uplifting, inspiring experience to be at that school. And I just feel completely honored to be able to tell their story, and hopefully other schools, other countries will see the importance of this. And also they'll raise some money to be able to bring more girls into the school.
Well, this program is really important because it does allow you to shine a light on some of these amazing programs that are going on at a grassroots level with very little or no funding, but maybe inspire others to do the same, or maybe inspire governments to provide funding. So it starts small, but
yeah, that's absolutely
where it could grow.
And you know what? It is about amplifying. As I said before, amplifying voices makes the difference. And governments, especially countries where it's so ingrained, gender-based violence, they don't even, they're raising girls to be wives and mothers. Still. I mean, that has to change right away. But as I said before, it is really challenging to change a culture, to recognize equality.
Well, I think that's a really good place to turn our conversation to Afghanistan, unfortunately. What is it about that organization that speaks to your heart?
For me, I think I knew about Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan before I actually went to Afghanistan. I think it was about 20 years ago. Isn't that amazing? And here we are celebrating. So the first time I was in Kabul, I saw all these girls. It was just the turn at that point of a combat operation, NATO forces in there, girls being able to go to school. Here we are now tragically coming full circle. But I had been basically, donating money. I'd heard about this little known organization, Breaking Bread, which was based out of Calgary, an incredible group of women who said, throw a dinner party and raise some money, and we're going to pay the salaries of teachers in Afghanistan, and we're going to get girls in school. And I was just so moved, first of all, by the concept of that. But when I went to Kabul and was able to meet one of the teachers that had been, her paycheck was thanks to these Canadian women, it was really extraordinary. And I watched them almost go into the alleys of Kabul and bring the girls to school. And they all stand in front of a trough, almost an animal trough, all brushing their teeth, preparing for their class, and so excited about the fact that they were allowed now to go back to school. So I have been deeply involved in Afghanistan for decades, to be honest, and that organization spoke to me as a concrete way to try to help get the education these girls want and pay the salaries of these women, which, by the way, is nothing, almost nothing on any scale. Now I look at what's happening, and it is completely heartbreaking, because now it is since, 2021, August 15th, 2021, the fall of Kabul, no school for girls, no work for women, no driving. You cannot go out without a guardian, and that guardian could be your young son. And by the way, if he doesn't feel like going out, you're not going out. It has completely gone back. It's like nothing we've ever seen in any country in the world, what is now happening. It is absolutely gender apartheid. So more than ever, it's important for some kind of a unified approach for the international community to force change. And it is not an easy road, and it is going to be a big, heavy lift to try to reverse all of the setbacks and these draconian restrictions that women now in that country face. But Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan have never looked away. Even now, they have never looked away. They have never stopped. And that, to me, is the kind of motivation and determination we need as strong Canadian women, but also these young girls in Afghanistan need to know the world has not forgotten you.
Exactly. And your turn of phrase, gender apartheid, I think is so exactly what's happening there. Women are no longer allowed to have access to contraception very recently. And yes, so our dinner party, virtual again this year, started 20 years ago.
Amazing.
Specifically to support that schools in Afghanistan, paying those teachers' salaries.
One of the things I loved, though, about the dinner party when it first started, I vividly remember I have 6 great girlfriends, and we are always, either dog walking or chatting all the time. And we decided we're going to do this 20 years ago, I guess it was. And I think it was on the Breaking Bread website where it said, make a fancy cocktail or, do something cool. And we did it, and we still do this. We have, in fact, the Kitini, anybody in the audience from Kitchener will like this. It's called a Kitini, a Kitchener martini, which is basically a Ryan Coke, because Kitchener was the hometown, Kitchener-Waterloo, of Seagram's Crown Royal. So the Kitini emerged from the Breaking Bread dinners, and all for a good cause. Really a motivation just for my girlfriends and I know so many other women who also through these parties to raise some money. So it really is a sort of a beautiful trade-off.
It is. So yes, we may have to add the Kitini to.
I wish I had a Kitini right now. Right? It feels like we could really enjoy one of those.
That'd be great.
I hope people out there watching are having one now.
I hope so. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper into your career. How has what's happened in the world of journalism and careers in general for women and getting older? We like to think that equality is equality, and we're so much better in Canada and North America. Probably we're not as great as we think. What are your thoughts on, what's happening out there in the real world?
That's a great
question.
Being
a real world person.
I think equality is a work in progress.
Yep.
In this country and in every country. We're better off than many women in many countries, but we are still, men outnumber women in the workforce, out-earn women in the workforce. So there's, I think under half, if I have my stats right, under half of the people in the workforce are women in this country. So there's I guess that's sort of the refrain forever that my mother would have said. It's a long road to change. We've seen change. There is definitely more representation in the media. Then the next question is higher up, executive level. How many women are there? Higher than that, CEOs, how many women? And I think the numbers are very disappointing, to be honest. I believe that we have to, again, it's about saying things out loud. It's not that women are less qualified for these jobs. It's more about amplifying the voices of women, the confidence of women to push for things that should be equally theirs as it is for men. So I think we are, how do I put this? We are very lucky to be born in this country, to be women in this country. I now worry so much about women of color in Canada because I see whether it's online abuse, women journalists, women of color, I am absolutely horrified at what I read in my own country against fellow female journalists who are women of color. It is unfathomable to me that someone can actually type this out under this sick, anonymous umbrella of social media. For all the good social media can do, there is still this sort of poison that exists.
Absolutely.
So that is where we need to still remain vigilant and focused, is women at large, aging women, young women entering, still we need to be mentors for them, and women of color. I think that is something, it's all sort of emerging still. The more we talk, the Me Too movement exposed a lot. And we can't just let a movement die. We have to stick with it and see it to its end. And it may be, who knows when, but today, as I said in the beginning of this, equality is a work in progress. That's what I believe.
And I know so many women on this particular committee that for the dinner party, I mean, they've been working with gender equality issues for 40 years. 40 years WHAM has been in existence. And sometimes we're in a committee meeting and I just see them and they're seething because they're like, I can't believe we're still fighting this same fight. Like, how did this happen to this person? How did Roe v. Wade get overturned? Like, the gains that we assume we have now put in stone are still being taken away. So I guess it's constant. You cannot let it slip. You have to constantly be fighting to make sure that it's always moving forward. But let's talk a little bit more about the fun stuff in your career.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Now we want some of the dirt.
Oh wow. Okay. Lots of that. I'm not sure how much I'll share, but
That's okay. So you've interviewed lots of amazing celebrities, politicians. You know, what have been some of the most surprising interviews?
oh my goodness, wow. I always wish, and my message to everyone is journal, especially journalists, because there's such a multitude of stories, you won't remember it. But I have lots of amazing moments, I guess. You know, sometimes it's the worst moments that you remember the clearest. So I do remember early on, I was the co-host of Canada AM, which of course was a big news-driving morning show in this country for years and years and years. And I was the co-host, and Sarah Ferguson, who was the Duchess of York, Prince Andrew's then wife, came on the show. They were divorced, but she was still sort of using her celebrity to sell different products. And so I felt it was incumbent upon me to ask about that, because she was being publicly criticized for using her celebrity status to sell products for her own gain. And she didn't like it. And she took her mic off live during a live television interview. I think she told me it was either her or Dr. Phil, the TV psychologist, who told me I was rude. I forget who, but she walked off the set. And that is a moment you don't know what to do. But you've got to stand by the questions you're asking. You're never asking them for yourself, although I was curious. You're asking because you are supposed to be the person who reflects what Canadians want to know. And that's not always easy, especially when you're interviewing prime ministers or people who are in trouble. Because half the country is going to support you and be happy you asked the question, and the other half is going to think, you awful person, how dare you be so rude. But on a great note, you're just thinking about the UK, I did an interview with, I'm a huge Beatles fan, like a big Beatles fan. First album I ever bought at age 11 was a Beatles album. And I had this opportunity to go interview him, to go to Abbey Road Studios in London and interview him. And I was so nervous, but I thought I know everything about the Beatles. I just wanted to have 5 hours with him. Anyway, he walked in and he said, and I was busily writing notes, and he said, and I was using a pencil, which I still to this day, I don't know why, I guess I'm not confident enough to write with a pen. I was writing with a pencil then and now. But he walked in and he said, and he had a pencil in his mouth, and he said, okay, we've got a pencil pusher, LaFlamme, LaFlamme. I don't want any trouble from you. And he brought me in, we did the interview, and in it, I was like dying to ask this question. I'd heard this rumor that the original lyrics of Yesterday were not what we all have come to know. And he looked at me and he said, yeah. And he sat down beside me at the piano and he started playing Yesterday. And the words, the original words, scrambled eggs, oh baby, how I love your legs. And this was Paul McCartney singing on a piano bench at Abbey Road Studios, and I really thought, if I get hit by a double-decker bus walking out of this, that's okay, because that was, I've had a moment now.
That's amazing.
But on the presidents and prime ministers, a weird thing just happened to me in Tunisia. So many years ago, not that many, I went to Israel to interview Benjamin Netanyahu, and very combative interview. Again, that's where your research comes in handy, and I do like a good sparring interview. So now I'm in Tunisia. I'm interviewing one of the first female politicians ever elected to parliament, and she posts on Tunisia is a big Instagram country. She posted on Instagram a picture of her and I. I had been warned, don't post anything on social media until you're out of the country for your own safety. Okay? She, this young politician, 33 years old, posts a picture of her and I on social media, says, I just was interviewed by Lisa LaFlamme, blah, 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 blah. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage. She woke up to a tsunami of hate because someone online dug into the deep recesses of the internet, found the interview I'd done with Benjamin Netanyahu. Keep in mind, Tunisia is an Arab country. They put up a picture of me and Netanyahu again and started accusing this young politician of being a collaborator with Israel, which you can imagine. I mean, this is the kind of explosive language. You do not want to be a diplomatic incident when you're anywhere, but especially when you're there for Journalists for Human Rights. So it was a really big education again, at how we come full circle on social media can be for the good and the bad. But that shocked me, to be honest, that I don't even know where they found that. I guess it's obviously online somewhere. That interview. But she kind of brushed it off. She said, I get so much hate online. This doesn't mean anything to me. And she was really great. And that's the important message, to sort of bring it back to, how do you deal with bad news? How do you deal with online hate? Push through it. She's pushing through it and is still proud that she is one of the only women who will now be the voice. Certainly men didn't work in the region she's in. So they're giving her a try. Anyway, I don't know if I've been rambling there, but...
No, not at all. I mean, I think it highlights a couple of things. I mean, we keep coming back to how social media has really changed the way news is portrayed, news is received. How do you see that for your career going forward? I mean, you've embraced Instagram and you've embraced different kinds of social media.
Embraced with apprehension, shall we
Right.
say, because I get it too. It's a thorny circle world to be in. For me, I am happy to use it to expose to the world incredible people doing incredible things, brave women against all odds who are saying, this is wrong. You know, what is happening in whatever their environment is wrong. And I am happy to give them a platform so that people know, oh boy. First of all, a lot of people we're all so busy and I get that completely. There's a lot of times if you're raising kids or working full time and making dinners and all, living in your own country, you don't really have a lot of time to look beyond your borders. I get that. But a lot of people sit there when they've got time on their hands and scroll through social media. So hopefully they stop on some of these incredible little sound bites I like to post of women doing great things, and it does make a difference. For me, going forward, it's really all about human rights and democracy projects, and I've been really encouraged to see that how do I put this, that people want my help in trying to tell some of these stories or be a big mouth. I'm happy to be a big mouth for a lot of women who aren't as comfortable with that, and I get it. So that's where my focus is, and it's still all in the journalism world. Storytelling is something ingrained. You know that. It's the same for you. You don't. That doesn't change. It just changes how we tell a story or the platform we tell it on. So I feel very fortunate to have an opportunity now and more time to do some of the things that have always been a huge passion for me.
Well, I think this is a good time to have our second young lady
and I've
give
got
us a question.
I've got your phone, and I don't know your private code, Karyn, so.
I have my face.
Okay.
Thank God I have that. I might not remember it otherwise. Here we go. This one is from Laya.
Hi, Miss LaFlamme. Here's my question. As young people, we are learning how to face difficult things and overcome challenges. You've been all over the world and have seen a lot of sadness and pain. Is there a story that has had a particular impact on you, and how do you deal with the impact of the stories you cover? Kind of as a follow-up, how do you stay hopeful?
I immediately get emotional at a question like that because there is one story, and it takes me to Afghanistan, actually. I was covering the Canadian military at a very small military base in Kandahar, which of course is the most fundamentalist region of the country. It's where the Taliban really are the stronghold. And I was standing by the front gate of this small military base, and I see an old man and a little boy walking toward the front gate of the military gatehouse. And they walk in, and I'm watching, and this little boy has I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, big kerchief over his head. And a military soldier comes to the old grandfather and an interpreter. They take him this was largely a bit of a small little hospital for the local people who lived in District 6 in Kandahar, which was the most dangerous part of Kandahar. Anyway, they unwrap this little boy's face, and he has a huge tumor on his face. And I saw, his name was Nematola. I don't want to get emotional, but it makes me emotional to remember it because I saw, the best of Canadian troops come forward for this little child, medically and emotionally, and the old grandfather who himself had legs full of scars, one fake leg, wooden leg, and one full of scars from the war with Russia some 30 years prior. And this actually is also a Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan story, because I did a story that night of this little boy, how the troops were trying to help him medically to look and see what was happening with this big tumor, put the story on the air, and a Calgary church saw the story, and they did a private fundraising for this little boy. And the money raised, the Canadian military didn't know what to do. They're like, what are you doing? We're not in a position to be fundraising. We're in a war here. But that's what happened. This church came forward, all this money. They figured it out pretty fast. The phones were ringing off the hook in the newsroom in Canada and also for the military. Anyway, they made enough money to take this little boy to a cancer hospital in Lahore, Pakistan. with his grandfather. Now, tragically, Nematola did not survive. The cancer was far too progressed. But he died with dignity in a clean hospital with his grandfather there. And I don't know, I think about that as a story that is both tragic and uplifting. How do I keep hopeful? I don't have an alternative. What's the point of not having hope? You have to have hope. There's nothing actually else. So that's why I try to stay optimistic. Does it hurt deeply? Yes, of course it does. And then you try to mobilize that emotion and that tragedy into change, which is the hard part, and I think the theme of all of this. But so a really great question, but I will say in honor of Nematola, that is the one I will never forget, that little boy and the love that he got from complete strangers on a small Canadian military base in Kandahar.
Amazing. Yeah, so to see those things happen right in front of you. I mean, as viewers, we get this filter of, you know, a television screen. And as touching as that makes us, I can't even imagine how that must impact you on a personal level. But
it does 100%. And I always let it, by the way, because I don't know any other way.
Yeah.
I think I am a very emotional person because I probably was always. But these things really just instill in you how lucky we are and how much work there is to do.
So, on that note, how much work there is to do? You know, you've made some changes to your career path in the last little while. What's next for Lisa LaFlamme?
Wow.
What is driving you these days, or you know, where are you getting excited to put your energy in the next little while?
Well, again, I think these democracy projects, these human rights projects, they really motivate me, and I am hoping to do more of it. Really, I have time now to really think about the things that mean the most to me, my passion for equal rights, and in this country as well. I mean, I think of the situation with so many Indigenous women and children and lives, and that is something as important to me. I look at so many of the people that have come from Afghanistan to this country, and I'm very involved in their lives, whether they like it or not. I can't help it. It's they've become dear friends to me, and the people we helped get out of Afghanistan. Now they're a year and a half in, a little bit more than that, on Canadian soil, and that is also a great challenge to be in another country. They'd much rather be in their own country with their own language, with their relatives, their great-grandparents, but it is not a possibility for them for safety. So anything like that, it is something that means a lot to me. And you know, the thing is, and I'm sure you know this, in this country, if you put out an all call, you know, there's an Afghan family who's just arrived, they have 4 kids, here are their ages. I've had my garage absolutely filled from the floor to the ceiling with incredible donations for these people to try to get them the things they need to start a life. So that's a full-time job as well, trying to help people become acclimatized to this country, and also the effort to try to continue helping to get their mums and sisters and brothers and aunties into this country and out from under the thumb of the Taliban, because I look at what some governments are doing. You know, some governments are giving automatic refugee status to Afghan women. Others are giving education, free university education, free visas, free university education. Get in here, get to our country, get out of from under that cloud, that claw, that criminal act. Canada, I find, is quite slow. I mean, IRCC is very slow, and it frustrates me to no end. I think that everybody wants to see every country do more to help these women who really are, as we've been saying, just in a position that we couldn't even in our worst nightmare imagine having to live through.
No. These are such huge, enormous issues, and for a lot of us individuals, we're trying to figure out how we can get involved. What is it that an individual can do? So, as someone who's been involved in lots of different kinds of organizations, what do you say to women and men who want to get involved and try and change the things that are happening in Afghanistan and in Canada and in Tunisia? How do you motivate people to get involved?
I get it. I understand that it seems overwhelming and people may think one person doesn't make a difference, but actually I've seen it. One person can make a difference. I go back to Purity Gikunda in Kenya. She's making a difference in lives with no money, by the way. So what can we do? Find your passion, whether it's women's rights, the environment, pets, animals, safety. I mean, there is no shortage of causes. And if you're not, you must have some passion inside of you that is a place for you to put some of that goodwill that you want to do. And I would say find it and focus on it for even a little while. What I always have found for myself, and I can only speak for myself, is the satisfaction you get from doing something for someone else. It's difficult to even explain what it does to you to know, all right, I'm not just sitting on my hands, I'm doing something, and maybe someday it'll make a difference. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a $5 donation to something, to Sick Kids Hospital, to whatever it is. And it isn't just money. There's so many ways to throw a dinner party, make a katini. Mm-hmm. But there's just so much people can do, and I think it's a matter of just doing it. Just doing it. And I know also, like I said, people are busy lives, but you will get more from seeing the picture of a child on your fridge that you may be sponsoring and knowing, okay, I'm making a little difference. Maybe there's a well in that child's community now that didn't exist 5 years ago or whatever. These are little things the rest of the world can do to help countries, the people that are most oppressed. So that's what I say. Find your passion, do something. Do something.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so enlightening. Your stories are, fulfilling and uplifting and hopeful. And
I hope so, Karyn. Great to speak with you, and I thank you so much for asking me to be part of such an amazing anniversary event as well. It's really been great chatting with you.